Skirt Magazine recently interviewed poet and spoken word artist Valerie Papaya Mann. Papaya's love for the written word began in her formative years growing up in Washington, D.C., and continues today at 70 years of age. With no signs of slowing down, we sat down with Papaya to discuss her process and inspiration as a writer and performer. We hope you enjoyed the interview. So I am sitting here with spoken word artist Valerie Papaya Mann, and I have seen Papaya perform a couple of times. Once at a Nikki Lopez event, and most recently at it was the Stonewall event,
yes,
right? At
Stonewall fundraiser, yes.
Right, the Stonewall fundraiser. So I want to find out how you got into spoken word. I've done a little bit of research just on your background. I know you're from the DC area. I'm from the DC area. But you have a whole journey in your life. Like, when I was reading about you, I read nothing about spoken word. I read about Ghana. I read about, HIV, work and all of these things. Nothing about spoken word. So tell me about your journey. Where did you come from, and how did you kind of get into this type of creative work, literary work?
Well, I am from the Washington, D.C. area, as I said, and I've spent most of my life there, but I also lived in California, Atlanta, Ghana, and here. So I've lived a few places around the country, as well as I've lived in the South Florida area for about 6 years.
Okay.
Yes, I've done writing and spoken word, poetry since my 20s, but the work that I did, which was mostly HIV and AIDS, healthcare, as well as prevention, education, advocacy, those things took up a big chunk of my life. So I just began writing in my 20s.
Did you grow up in a literary family? How did you get into writing? Or was it just something you just picked up naturally?
I'm just, I think, one of those people that's kind of a writer.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a journal. I've done journaling and writing for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I came out in Washington, D.C. in like the early 80s, late 70s. Mm-hmm. And it was a very culturally rich community that I came out in. In fact, I often refer to that period of time as sort of like, kind of like the Harlem Renaissance, but in Washington, D.C. So there were lots of spoken word artists and performers, singers, dancers, very creative people. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that period ran concurrent with the AIDS epidemic. So even though many of the people that I was associating with at that time were artists, many of them were men, and some of them got sick, and pretty much the majority of them died. So that's how I got involved in HIV and AIDS work, sort of at the same time. But I have enjoyed writing poetry and spoken word for a long time, and I even have, I guess I'm about 3/4 through a book on Ghana, because I did live there for a few years. So I'm working on that manuscript, and we'll probably finish it at some point. But I got involved in the arts in Washington, and sort of as I was coming out, and also pretty much as the AIDS epidemic was taking flight. I remember back in high school doing poetry, in college doing poetry. In fact, my middle name, which is now my legal name, but Papaya was my writing name in college, and I entered a college-wide poetry contest won the contest, and sort of got outed as Papaya, and everybody started calling me Papaya after that. So
it's a catchy name.
yeah, so Papaya became which was my creative name. I still kept the name because a lot of the work that I was doing, I was able to be very free and very much involved in the creative scene. So Papaya became sort of like my creative name.
Tell me about your writing process. Tell me about how the ideas come. Well, first tell me about how the ideas come, and then if you could, tell me about transitioning from writing to performance.
Mm-hmm. Well, my process is generally often a title might come first, or actually the prose might start flowing. But generally, my work when I was in my 20s and 30s was mostly about love and getting with people and working.
That's what life's about.
That's what life is about
yeah.
then. But as I have matured, my writing has come much more focused on the things that are happening around me, concern about the aging in the lesbian community and not being able to find people, as well as sometimes it's great to tackle taboo subjects like sex because people love hearing about that stuff. And writing about our sexual lives because we still have sexual lives after 30 and after 40. So yeah, my topics generally tend to come to me, and it's something generally that I'm pondering. The last piece that I wrote, which you heard at the Stonewall Fun and Fundraising event, was a piece that's called it's really about going back. A blast in the past. That's part of the title, is a blast from the past, because I was thinking about all the things that have occurred in my life that I don't see anymore, pretty much, So I started writing this piece, and it just took on a life of its own because it really just made me do more remembering about my childhood, about being a teenager, being a young woman, and so I just started writing more about that. So the three pieces that I've written most recently have been what I would call spoken word more than poetry, even though it has poetic overtones. And one of the pieces was about aging in the lesbian community and people starting to be invisible or missing from the scene. The other piece that I read at Lesbian Thespian was a piece. Well, that was the piece that's called "Where Are You, My Sisters?" So that's the piece about the missing women. And then I wrote a piece called "Pop Goes the Weasel," which is pretty much about that you can still be sexual even without a partner. In fact, it encourages people. Take it in your own hands, take your own sexuality and your own pleasure into your own hands and own it, because it belongs to you. And you don't really need someone else for that, as well as, it's just kind of gets funny and people laugh and so on. And then the last piece, which you heard me do, which was about a blast from the past, which just talked about things like phones with cords, typewriters that aren't electric. They don't even have typewriters now. So, it talked about music and how important that was when I was a lot younger and everybody was dancing and having so much fun, but also just how we have listened to it from cassette tapes to VCRs to DVDs to Blu-ray to streaming.
Yeah, yeah.
So much has changed. So I thought that that was an important piece to do. And actually, if I had had more time, it was a piece that I wanted to engage the audience in, just like I did with Where Are You, My Sisters?
Yeah, yeah.
As a writer, I like to be close to my audience and very casual and informal with them, so that it erases some of that separation. And I also enjoy doing pieces that involve the audience so that they can talk back to me and to each other.
Right.
And so Where Are You, My Sisters? There was a call and response to that.
That was a little bit of lightning and thunder.
Lightning and thunder, which is what it does here in South Florida. We can't control that. But then the women had a chance to speak back to me, because a part of that refrain was, Where are you, my sisters? And then they would say, I am here, or we are here.
It's very interesting because this concept, this idea of self-love, especially with older women, women past, over 40, which, 40 is nothing, but still, that's that kind of category. This keeps coming up in practically every interview that I do. Everyone I speak to, this concept continues to come up. And the whole notion of finding value in ourselves, many women don't, many women have children, had families, had, marriages and all of these things. Many don't. Many haven't. And it's this idea of acknowledging, understanding, believing that one has value as a human being, and the sexuality goes hand in hand with that, right? That whole idea of self-love in older women, it's so important, and it's missing for so many people.
And that's part of the reason that I decided to write Where Are You, My Sisters? As well as Pop Goes the Weasel, and even in this case, A Blast from the Past, because I feel that we are women over 40, certainly over 60, are very marginalized and start disappearing from the scene, so to speak. I believe all of us suffer as a result of disappearing clubs and bookstores and spaces that are dedicated to LGBTQ people. But it is especially devastating on the elder senior population.
Yeah.
Because they have less mobility, many of them have less financial stability, and most aren't interested in being in clubs and bars at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. So sort of the graying of the community of women that I came out with and lived with and played with and enjoyed life with, I'm seeing now that many of them are losing their mobility, losing their financial stability, and losing their connections to the community.
So let me ask you, as you've traveled and lived in many different places, how did your work change as you kind of or how did your creative work change as you traveled and you had all of these different experiences and lived these different lives in these different locations?
Well, I think any writer picks up from their experiences as they I would say living in different places reflected in my writing, but also just growing older reflects in the writings.
Are there certain standout sort of shifts? Do you know what I mean? Like when you go to certain places and you have certain experiences and you sort of feel that shift in your creativity. Right.
I think, I do feel that. Being down here, we're close to water. We have lots of sunshine. There's a whole way that we're sun worshipers, and outdoor cafe kind of people. So, yeah, I guess that creeps into it as well. But I would say that probably aging is the biggest factor because, like I said, what I was writing at 30 is not. I just this past year celebrated my 70th birthday.
Wow.
So my writing is not about the same stuff anymore.
Sure.
Because like you pointed out, when you're 30, you're trying to figure out love and who you are in relationship to other people and how to be in relationships, and certainly lesbian and gay relationships, which there weren't that many notes and books to follow. That I think that my writing has just matured as I have matured. But certainly being in different places, I'm sure, affects us. Because when I was in Ghana and writing the book that I was writing there, that I'm still in the process of writing, I realized when I came back to the United States, I couldn't write any of that. That it had something to do with me being there, seeing the sights, hearing the sounds, smelling the food, and having those experiences. It just made the writing flow. When I came
the
back,
immediate environment.
yes,
right
the immediate
there.
environment.
Yeah.
But when I came back here, it was more difficult for me to write that because it seemed so far away and such a foreign life. A piece of poetry like Where Are You, My Sisters? It's a part of my life experience that I'm observing the disappearance of the lesbian community, especially the mature 60-plus lesbian community. I'm actually seeing it decrease, and many more people are ill or dying. So I feel affected by it. So no matter where I would be living, I think I would still feel affected by that. So sometimes I am writing based on what I'm sensing around me. And that would be true of Where Are You, My Sister, as well as Pop Goes the Weasel. Because Pop Goes the Weasel, which is a piece about masturbation, I was at a luncheon with some friends, and we started having a conversation about sex. And I realized this is very rare, that mature women, because we were all at least 60 plus, would sit down and have an honest conversation about sex, because there were people who admitted in the conversation they'd never had an orgasm, they didn't know how to have an orgasm, they thought you needed somebody else to give you an orgasm, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So that conversation was in my mind when I started thinking about it, like, wow, there's people that really don't know how to do this themselves. And certainly, I even say in the poem, I was a late bloomer. I didn't even know how to do it myself.
So let me ask you, this is going to be our final question. What is in your creative future, immediate creative future, long term? What do you have on the horizon?
I think that I would probably end up performing more, and which also encourages me to write more. Mm-hmm. And interesting enough, I don't often like to keep going back and doing the same pieces, so it kind of forces me to write more. Because once I say to myself, I'm going to write a new piece, and then I'm like, oh my God, there's a period when it feels like, oh, what am I going to say? Because I always know I have other work that I can bring forward. So it's a good process for me. It's stress relieving for me. It gets stuff out of my head, like all these things about remember when, and for a whole week I was going around thinking of these things. And I think I even talked to a few people and said, is there anything you remember that you think I should put in here? And people were like, oh yeah, well, I remember when we used to wear bell bottoms, or I remember when we did whatever. And so I like the interaction of that. I don't mind that people have asked me to do it or even donate my time. Mm-hmm. And I like that form of interacting with the crowd. I don't mind, because I can actually handle a crowd. So there's a certain feeling that I get when I'm sharing that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will probably continue to do that. And life is dynamic and always changing, so there's always stuff to write about in the present, the past, or the future. So I think that that's probably something that I would continue. My acting, I'm pretty interested in maybe doing more acting, but I'm especially interested in a form of theater that I did in Washington that's called playback,
Mm-hmm.
where you actually are dealing with real, live, tangible issues, and the audience gives you a story, and then the actors act it out.
Oh, wow.
Right there, it's just dynamic, just like that. So I haven't introduced it here, and I've thought about that. Well, maybe I could do something like playback with a group, so those kind of things.
Oh, that would be terrific.
Yeah, because it's you can pick any subject and pretty much, or you can have no subject. You can talk about how you're feeling today and have people bring that up, and then the actors on stage just act out whatever the person is saying. And then you have a facilitator type person who talks through, what did you see? What would have been different? Were you able to see your mother in this situation? Because some people have very tragic stories.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm interested in playback theater, which is a form of improv.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen that much improv down here.
No.
But improv is fun because it's dynamic and it has to happen right that minute. A lot of actors are afraid of improv because they don't think that they'll have anything to say or do. But for people who like me, it's just like, okay, good. I don't have to learn any lines or anything. I just get up here and just say whatever and do whatever is in the moment.
Yeah.
And
it's so much more natural.
Yeah.
It's so much more natural.
So much more natural.
And it's so much fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and everybody learns. So playback theater is something that I think that I'd like to introduce into the lesbian community here, because see, I could take any of those poems and read that poem, and then we could do playback around it.
Mm-hmm.
The things from the past, the looking at our sexual lives, or looking at our lives and feeling concerned that people are disappearing. Any of those things would be great topics to just do acting with. So, I'm just interested in continuing. I don't have any burning desire, so I haven't been seeking out doing it because I like doing lots of different things. Right now I'm putting together a group that I'm taking to Ghana because I spend some time there, and I've spent time there, and I have a little bit of a life going there. So, I think that I'm interested in doing more poetry and spoken word.
Papaya Mann, thank you so much.
Sure, I'm happy to do it.
Thank you for your time. Skirt Magazine wants to thank Papaya for her time.